shining bright lotus.
And I managed to just put it somewhere. So I'm retrieving it. Here it is. So, yes, on becoming somebody before being nobody. So we start out with this apparent contradiction between becoming a person with a solid sense of self, positive self-esteem, realizing our potentials, and on the other hand, this Buddhist teaching of the non-self or anatta. So I want to start with this question asked by Tammy Simon in the foreword to the book by Bruce Tift, Already Free. And many of us have been reading that book for Mondo training, and Ming Po has referred to it multiple times recently. But Already Free, Buddhism meets psychotherapy on the path of liberation. But Tammy Simon asks, right in the foreword, how do we build a healthy self and discover the lack of any enduring self at the same time? That's her question. And so we're gonna look at that. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. I do appreciate Bruce Tift's book, and I recommend it. But I'm going to take this in a little bit different direction. This isn't really about a contradiction. This is more about a sequence. It's not really about opposing views. And then there's Jack Engler's quote that is the title for this Dharma talk. What you have to be somebody before you can be nobody. So we'll explore that idea in more detail and look at how the self according to Western psychology and the non-self according to Buddhist psychology actually complement each other and even agree more than you might think, even maybe more so than what Bruce Tift is talking about in his book, Already Free. In the book, Why Buddhism is True by Robert Wright, he points out that the Buddhist teaching on non-self is not an absolute negation of the self, but rather an invitation to see the self not as permanent and not as a permanent and unchanging entity, but as a constantly changing process, much like the flow of a river. And actually, this perspective aligns well even with some modern psychological understanding of the self as a dynamic social construct shaped by experiences and relationships over time. By recognizing the impermanent nature of the self, we can let go then of rigid attachments and those identities that cause, those identifying qualities that cause suffering, the ways we identify with things and think, oh, this is me, this has always been me, I'll always be this way. Well, you're not who you were yesterday. I'm not who I was a month ago. We're certainly not who we were 10 years ago. But Wright also points out that from the Buddhist view and our own personal experience, the self can't be found. We can't find it. That's what we learned, and that's what we find out in the Mondo process, right? That's what we experience. Not only does the self not exist as an independent entity, it doesn't have any inherent existence. Quantum physics actually shows us that nothing does. Nothing has inherent existence. According to Wright, Buddhists say that reality lacks inherent existence, and that fits very well with quantum physics, that it doesn't exist as we conventionally think of it. This is the idea of sunyata, or emptiness. We said it very clearly in our service this morning. At nature's most fundamental level, quantum physics recognizes that nothing has permanent fixed properties, and nothing is independent. Wright points out that Buddhists take this interconnectedness to mean that any seemingly distinct form, a tree, a house, a self, is empty of inherent existence. Since nothing can stand on its own, there is no thing. No thing is really there. So in thinking that the world around us is made up of distinct things, we see unclearly. The world isn't things. The world of things isn't really there. Remember Nagarjuna's insight that everything is empty of inherent existence. So, coming back to Bruce Tiff, he shows how Buddhist psychology and Western psychology are different views. And in general, yes, the developmental view of Western psychology versus what he calls the fruitional views of Buddhist psychology are different, but certainly not mutually exclusive. And they not only can coexist, they really complement each other. And again, even within Western psychology, there's a recognition that self is not static and unchanging. It's not a fixed, separate entity, but a dynamic process influenced by internal and external factors. This aligns with the Buddhist concept of anatta, or non-self. Now I want to switch to something else here. To a sentence spoken by a British pediatrician and psychoanalyst named Donald Winnicott, a man who spent 40 years watching mothers and babies, and who once startled the room of his colleagues by announcing, "There is no such thing as a baby." What? That's what he said. There is no such thing as a baby. The room went quiet. Maybe you just did. What could that possibly mean? What do you mean? Every one of us has seen a baby. What Winnicott meant was this: you have never seen a baby alone. There is no such thing as an infant existing by itself. There's only ever a baby and someone, a nursing couple, a mother-child, a held child. An infant left truly alone actually doesn't become an individual. In fact, an infant left truly alone doesn't even survive. You might look at Renee Spitz's research, where he researched orphanages during World War II. And when a baby had all its physical needs met, but wasn't attended to and held, the mortality rate was incredible. So all that was needed physically was provided, but if not held and touched and seen and responded to, babies died. And so That's why I want to point this out. Winnicott, without knowing it, was actually giving a teaching on the interdependence of all reality and what Buddhism calls dependent origination. The basic formula is this: when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this ceases, that ceases. That means nothing is fully independent, and experience, identity, and suffering are all conditioned processes. It's a fundamental notion in Buddhism. As we most aptly, or as we mostly apply it to things out there, think the flower that is sunshine and rain and soil, the table that is forest and carpenter, the morning. This morning, I want to apply it not just to things out there, but to something more intimate, the self, the sense of being someone. And so the self, too, never arises alone. So let's consider where this comes from, this sense that I am me. Think honestly about where your sense of self came from. Not philosophically, but developmentally, biographically, phenomenologically. It comes from faces. I see you, you see me. It came from whether a face lit up when you entered the room or didn't. It came from being picked up when you cried, or possibly not, since some of us, I would include myself, our parents were taught to follow Dr. Spock, who said, when your baby's crying, don't pick the baby up. My suspicion, though, is that my mother still picked me up, at least some of the time. It came from someone saying, your sense of self came from somebody saying your name in a certain tone for 20 years, or maybe longer if you took longer to leave. Psychoanalytic studies of self-development or ego development of the last century, Winnicott and after him Heinz Kohut, mapped this with great care. Kohut showed us that a child builds a cohesive sense of self out of thousands of moments of being mirrored, like a mirror, seen, delighted in, taken seriously. And one of the most important things a parent is for a child is being this mirror. Hopefully a consistent and accurate mirror. If a child is in distress, the mirror shows concern about that distress. If a child is animated, the parent recognizes the animation, the excitement, the interest. The gleam in the parent's eye is not decoration, it is construction material. And when that material is missing, when the mirroring fails badly enough, the structure doesn't form. The person grows up, holds a job, raises children, and somewhere at the center, there's a place that never consolidated. A self that has to be held together, maybe by force, by achievement, by approval, by gaining a sense of control, by never ever being wrong or having to believe that. I suspect some of us know this from the inside. Consider a moment when you have felt and been truly seen. Consider that for a moment. A moment of being truly seen. And then contrast that. Think of a time, or think of someone, maybe not yourself, trying to hold yourself together, trying to get approval, trying to achieve yet another degree or another certificate, or trying to be in control of the situation. Now let's come back to the Buddha. In the West, we've heard the anatta story as a story many times of negation. There is no self. But instead, it's a story of liberation. There is no self to hold on to because it isn't that to begin with. But rather, it's a story of interdependence and impermanence. Let's listen again to what Winnicott discovered. And notice that it is not negation either. There is no such thing as a baby. Well, what about that again? The self never arises alone. It's woven, moment by moment, out of relationship. This isn't about any flaw in the self. This is the dharma of the self. Dependent origination is not the self's shameful secret. It's its actual nature. It always was. It's always arising as a process. The teaching of non-self is not you shouldn't exist or you don't exist. It is you never existed in the way you feared you had to. Alone. Separate. So-called self-made. Defended. Do you feel the difference? The view of negation of self feels like shame. The other removes the very ground shame stands on. So, coming back to being somebody first before we can be nobody. Way back in the 70s and 80s of the last century, an American psychologist named Jack Engler did something unusual. He trained deeply in Vipassana in Asia and in psychoanalysis in Boston, and he studied advanced meditators with the tools of Western research. And he came back with one sentence that has guided 2 generations of practitioners and teachers. He's the one that said you have to be somebody before you can be nobody. And what he meant was actually very practical and tender. The insight into non-self is disillusionment. And you can only afford to be disillusioned about a self that actually got built. A person whose inner structure is fragmentary does not experience the dissolving of self-boundaries as liberation. They experience it as the thing they have feared their whole life, falling apart. I've witnessed it, and I've witnessed it on 7-day silent retreats. Maybe some of you have. What looks like surrender becomes collapse. The traditions knew this. It's why the old Buddhist training was slow, embedded in community, so full of ethics and relationship before anyone was handed the heavy tools of sitting for long periods of time. Not everybody can actually handle a 7-day meditation retreat. And notice the Buddha himself was somebody first. 29 years, a son, a husband, a father, a prince, held, mirrored, educated, loved, by every account, securely attached. The going forth came after the structure. We sometimes read his story as though the palace years were wasted time. Like he was wasting his time till he finally left. I don't think they were. I think they were the foundation. And it's interesting that the late Daniel Brown, who died just a few years ago, is really a tremendous researcher, psychologist, and also a transmitted teacher of Mahamudra. He built his whole approach on this sequence. Remember, I said it's about that sequence, becoming somebody, and really emphasizing now, before becoming nobody. So he studied attachment. And before he would offer students the highest pointing out directions on a meditation retreat, he would ask about their attachment history. And for those whose early holding had failed, he developed practices to repair it. And that's the good news. It can be repaired. To build it in adulthood, the internal secure base that should have been built in childhood. He was not delaying the Dharma. He insisted this was the Dharma. A nervous system still scanning the horizon for abandonment, and maybe you've experienced somebody with a deep fear of abandonment, cannot rest as open awareness. So a nervous system still scanning the horizon for abandonment, be hyper vigilant about abandonment, cannot rest as open awareness. The secure base is not a detour from the path. It, in fact, is the trailhead. Now, I want to leave you with this. Just think about the Sangha as a holding environment, that we are a holding environment for each other. So what does that mean for us here this morning? It means that some of what happens is not just preparation for practice, it is also the practice. Even though it looks from a certain angle like, oh, we're becoming somebody, and we're holding each other. When we think about when we sit in metta, doing metta, loving kindness meditation, and direct it towards ourselves and towards others, there's structure being built. When this Sangha receives you week after week in your good months and your unbearable ones, without condition, structure's being built. The holding some of us did not receive at the beginning is being supplied. Late, but not too late. The research on attachment's unambiguous on this point. It is one of the most hopeful findings in all of psychology. Earned security is real security. The structure can be built at any age, in any relationship, steady enough to build it, including this one. Including the relationship you have with your own breath, kept faithfully, morning after morning, like a parent who shows up to pick up and hold the child. Ananda once said to Buddha, full of enthusiasm, "Surely, Venerable Sir, admirable friendship is half of the holy life." And Buddha corrected him. Not so, Ananda. Admirable friendship is the whole of the holy life. Swaha.
Beautiful, Hosho. Shining bright lotus.